So tomorrow are the Iowa Caucuses, and after more than a year of debating, campaigning, and a lot of speculating, we're finally going to see some results. And over the past few weeks, the polling for Bernie Sanders has been undeniably positive, not just in Iowa, but in other early states, in California and in Texas, and on the national scene more generally. And the final poll we're getting from Iowa, from Emerson, continues that trend. It has Bernie Sanders strongly in first place, 7 points ahead of Biden at 21, and basically double the level of support of Buttigieg and Warren at 15 and 14% respectively. In terms of movement, only Pete Buttigieg among the top candidates has made significant movement. Bernie Sanders is slightly down, but it's a statistical blip, -2 or +2. It's largely irrelevant at this stage in polling. But what matters here is the magic number of 15%. Because if you're below 15, you don't get any delegates, and if you're above it, you do. That's the threshold. And in a traditional primary state, that certainly matters, but it has an extra meaning in Iowa because if your candidate does fall below 15%, you as a caucus goer get a second chance to go to somebody else who was above 15. And that means that you have the ability to empower your second choice in a way you don't at a traditional primary vote. So the way it's going to work in New Hampshire later on in the process is that you go and vote. If you vote for somebody and they get 12%, tough cookies, they don't get any delegates, and your vote effectively didn't have any effect. But if you go to somebody who has 12% support at a caucus, what you'll be told is your candidate at your caucus did not meet viability. Please switch to another candidate who did, or you can choose not to and just go home and your time is done. And so when you look at these sorts of numbers, Elizabeth Warren being at 14% is massive, because if Warren is indeed at 14 and Buttigieg is at 15, it effectively means that Buttigieg has viability, as does Biden, as does Sanders, but it means that Warren does not. And it gives Warren's supporters, 14%, a lot of people, because she's just below the threshold, the chance to go to somebody else. And this is a potential boon to Bernie Sanders, because according to this poll, they asked some of the candidates who their second choice is. And for people like Sanders and Biden, it doesn't strictly matter as much because it's likely that they're going to hit viability given where they're polling. And Pete Buttigieg, maybe with 15 could slip below, but I think he's trending in the right direction. The question for Warren is likely the biggest. And if you look at her numbers, basically half of her supporters choose Bernie Sanders, 46%. So not quite a majority of Warren supporters go to Bernie, but a very, very strong plurality. And if Warren fails to reach viability, and this poll is to be believed, and most people end up picking a second person and don't just choose to go home, then Bernie Sanders will see a spike in support from Warren dropping out. Now, to be clear, if, for instance, Warren doesn't miss, but Klobuchar does, it could be a narrower result between Biden and between Sanders. So there's a lot happening right here. But if you look at the numbers as they exist in this moment, this is a strong poll for Bernie Sanders. The delegate reallocation does matter, but what this does show is Bernie Sanders is clearly in first place when you factor in first place choices, and that when you look at who may or may not hit viability, Bernie Sanders is likely going to be the one to come away with the most total support at the end of the night. And some other polls released today indicate that when you drop everybody else out except for Warren, Buttigieg, Biden, and Sanders, Sanders still does win, although by a smaller amount than the 7 points you see here, more like 5 or 6, because some of the second place support from Klobuchar goes to the more neoliberal candidates. Klobuchar doesn't have a whole lot of second place support for Bernie. So this is by no means over. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for Bernie Sanders supporters to maximize his chance of winning, to maximize his chance of getting second place support, to maximize his chance of getting every last delegate he can possibly get here. But when it comes to the overall results, this is yet another great sign for Bernie Sanders.